All right, folks, this is Founder Laerun, and I'm here with Lady Shel. Welcome back to Fantasy Grounds Unity A through Z, episode 14 this time. We are going to be discussing the story template and story banner usage in Fantasy Grounds Unity. And I would like to hear a little bit from our host, Lady Shel. Hello, Lady Shel.
Hey, sorry, I was turning off the commercial that was, I had the sound. It started talking, so I wasn't ready, but I'm ready now. Welcome everyone to our Fantasy Grounds A through Z.
All right, so today we're going to just cover the story banner and templates. And then we're also going to get into the anatomy of the story and the organization of it. We'll get into formatting a little bit and how you can link things together, and also how you can turn a simple group of tables into something a lot more sophisticated. We're not going to show that, but we'll definitely give you an example. So basically, the story is kind of like the heart of everything. And if you've ever used a module or anything like that, usually the author will start with the story. So I'm going to click on the story banner, which is on the right-hand side of the interface. And this would probably be true of almost every rule set out there. You're going to have a story thing. This is where a bulk of the text is. And all the other assets like tables, maps, encounters, parcels, all that stuff are normally connected to this particular format story. So I have something called new story. So this is something that maybe would be an index or an intro or whatever you want it to be. And then if you want to create something from scratch, you are going to click on the edit list within the story entry banner. And then you want to create a group as a good habit or as a good workflow. So right now it's on all. But if you click the drop down, you'll see all these different options. So I have the module Lost Mine of Phandelver open as an example, but I also created a group called Fantasy Grounds A through Z. And you do that by clicking on the Edit Groups button. You click the green little plus button, which says Add Category. So if you mouse over, and a little dialog box will come up. And then once you click the green plus button, it makes a category called Group 1. So I'm just going to call it My Story. And now I have my own group called My Story, and it's in alphabetical order. So now this is just a group. This is so I can organize all of my content into a specific group or area. And there is an importance of this. So if you plan on exporting your work or a module, you should have separate groups for each one of these categories, but in particular, I'm talking about story, that all say my story or they're related to whatever subject that you're working with. So I have this new group called My Story. And now at the bottom, you can click Edit List, or you can right click and create a new item. Either one of those is the same. And it'll bring up a new story entry. So I'm going to call this My Story. And that's the title. However, if you're going to have more than one page, you want to number these. And that's something that most people forget when they first start. So Shel, can you share me an experience that you may or may not have had converting modules or creating your own content in regards to the story entry?
Let's see, story entry. You mean as far as
The
I'm not
formatting.
sure what you want me to talk about.
Okay. Well,
It is important to number though, because otherwise things will go in alphabetical order, and you want your chapters to be in order. So you're going to start with 00.00 for your
correct.
very first page, and continue with your first chapter would be 0100.00. and it continues on chapter 2, 02.00, etc. And it will keep your order like, in order.
So this is what she's saying. So this my story, I've now called it 00.00. The next one, I'll just say this is part of this, is 00.01. So this would be like intro, credits, legal stuff, your index, those sort of things. So now that this one is 00.01, and if I drag and drop this into my group, my story group, now it comes in order. So I have 00.00, 00.01, and then it's followed by the text. So now I have this blank story entry.
Are you talking? Because I don't hear anything.
Okay. So basically I took this first entry and I relabeled it to 00.01, and I drag and dropped it into this group. And then I had a blank story entry, and I'm calling this 00.03, and it's titled blank. So what happens is when you do that and you have them in the same group, when you open up the first story entry, it creates this little arrow below. And as you click these arrows, it gives you the ability to go from page to page. So that's why you want to label these as such. And if you only use 1, 2, 3, and you go all the way to 9, once you get to 10, if you don't have the 00.00, the 10 will actually be up here in the top instead of at position number 10. So you go 0 through 9 is fine, but once you reach 10, it's going to go back up to the top of the story entry. It's not going to be as alphanumeric as you want it to be. So what you want to do is 01.00 or something like that, or 10.00. If you have that period or that dot in there, it's going to help organize your list. Generally, these little, what's that?
I was going to say I like to think of the second part of the numbers. You got the one after the dot.
Yeah,
That's your sub chapters
correct.
of your main chapter.
Right.
So if you want to think of it that way, that's probably an easier way to remember it.
Correct.
If you're numerically challenged like me, I'm awful with math.
So what she's saying is now we're going to go to chapter 1. And instead of leaving it like that, we're going to go 01.00. So now what this is the beginning of the module. All these other ones before are they're just basically like legal stuff and credits and that sort of thing. But when you actually get in your module or whatever you're creating, if applicable, then this is how you would continue to number it. So here I have another one. So unlock it and call this chapter 2. So this is how you number these. Now, what she was saying is these numbers on the other side of the period are actually the subchapters. So if I wanted to make a subchapter of chapter 1, then I would create a new entry. And just for ease of use, I might go 1.01 or 01.10, depends on how you want to do it. But the more spaces you have, the more flexibility you have as far as your range of numbers. So now there's a subchapter of chapter 1, and as you can see, it lists it under chapter 1 for the title, but the actual page number is after the second one, but it's in between chapter 1 and chapter 2. So that's just a kind of a precursor to, some of the organizational skills that you need when you're creating story entries. So the embodiment of this story is you have a question mark up here in which it'll take you to the wiki. You have a templates button, which we're going to cover. You have, of course, the story entry title. Your group here is a drop-down list where you can go to other books or other categories within a given story. And then you have the all button, which only filters to items that you might have shared. So for example, if I wanted to share this part 1 with Lady Shel, if she was connected to my table, I'd bring this up, right click on it, click sharing, and share record. So I'm only sharing this page with whoever's connected to my table. And right now it has this little letter P here. So if I click on all, it's only going to share or show or display the ones that I have shared. And the reason this is important, because if you shared a bunch of objects and you want to free up memory, you will be able to unshare it by clicking on this little number or letter P. And now I no longer have any shared documents. And that's true of almost all these different banners. It kind of works the same way. So this is just a way to get you to start thinking in terms of a group and then how you number things. If it's only one page, it's not going to be a big deal.
I have a comment.
Sure.
Okay, so say you have chapter one, and your chapter one, say it's called The Castle. So you call it 01.00 chapter one, and then put colon, and then put the castle. Now your 01.01 chapter one colon the castle. Now, if you have parts of the castle, say you have in the castle, you have each you got like a paragraph of each room. And what I have done is I have separated the rooms into different story elements.
Mm-hmm.
So each room has its own story
Nice.
um, thing, so that the DM, when the DM looks at the thing, they can say, "Oh, well, okay, we're going to, I don't know, the dining room or whatever," and you would call it the castle, and then you would call it dining room, so you know what room that you're in, and you're not putting like five rooms on the same page. If you give
Yeah.
each page its own room, it makes it a lot easier to find things.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned from doing
There
conversions.
you go. That's what I'm looking for. So basically, what she's saying is to keep it, more labeled and organized, you're going to put a descriptor here after the chapter or the number so that you have an idea of what it is. So I just named this the castle, and then for chapter 1 or the subchapter, I put the entryway. But then there's a whole nother part of the castle that's underground. So this would be the dungeon, and then it would start its own group here. So that's just kind of a way that she's talking how to do it. So you can get more fancy with it or more descriptive, but then remember you run out of room. So you don't want a story entry that's this long for the title. So
Yeah, it's better not to have story entries that you have to scroll forever to see the bottom parts where maybe your parcels or your encounters are.
right,
So that if you keep it to each room has its own story entry, then you're going to have everything visible, in that very first
that's right.
shot of that
That's
page.
right. So the story entries are very important. In my notes for this session, um, I have some notes here that I made. So these are some of the topics that we want to talk about. So this is a note. I would not normally link a note to anything because it doesn't export. So this is just used for basically this particular show. However, if I wanted to make something like a table or a story entry or whatever, you can link them to each other. So in other words, my story, if I unlock it and I drag these links in here, it creates like an index. So let me do that. So there's that. Oops.
Laerun, we have a question.
Sure.
It's Robert Anstead asked, "Is there a search function for text inside an entry?" I don't
No,
believe there is.
no. You can only search for the chapter or the heading. You won't have any search within the actual heading. I'm not sure why, but I know it's not hard coded into Fantasy Grounds. And yes, I believe that would be useful.
But if you keep your pages short, you shouldn't have to,
Yeah,
you should be able to see everything all at that first view
yes,
or very close to it, depending on,
right. But it would be nice to pull up all the entries that include a certain keyword within the story itself. I agree. That would be achieved if you can make a reference manual. So a reference manual, we don't normally have access to. So this is a SmartWorks only thing, although there's rumors that there's plans to make this more of a functional piece of Fantasy Grounds for the community as well, because this is one thing that is missing from this process. So for instance, Lost Mine of Phandelver and most of the official objects or products have reference manuals. So if you pull this up, this is equivalent to all these little links here that are in the library view. So you have random encounters, you have images, you have map. So what this does is it compiles it into a story. So you do have a search function within the reference material. So if you go to, let's say, this first chapter, and you wanted to search the whole book, or I don't think you can search by chapter, but it basically searches the whole document. So if you wanted to look up treasure, if I'd spelled it right, everything that's mentioned in the reference document that has to do with treasure is going to be listed. And then you can drill down from there. So there is some search functionality in Fantasy Ground, but it is only mainly in the reference manual. And even then, you still have to drill down into the document itself. But at least you have a way to filter out. If you were looking for how many times that this guy's name shows up within a given module, then you can do so. So for instance, there's a villain named Clark. So there's a villain named Clark, and I search for his name, and these are all the different spots in the reference manual that he shows up in. That's this guy here, the NPC. So there is some functionality, but it's not, it's not perfect.
Get another question?
Sure.
My squeezing arm wants to know, has someone reverse engineered the reference manual part yet, or is that super locked down? I just
Um,
wanted to comment that the reference manual that you make using the project author extension does not work correctly in Unity because of the API. They're still working on getting everything all set up, and so it doesn't really work properly. It
right.
displays kind of strange. You're just talking about a reference manual made from an official module. Now those work, but
Yep.
like when I make a module, I don't even use the project author because it's not working correctly in Unity.
Correct.
Displays really strange.
So if
So
you're only
anyway, you can answer the question part. I'm sorry for adding
okay.
my extra stuff in there.
All right. So if you're going to use Classic, you can use the extension called Project Author, and it works pretty well. However, when you export it and you try to use it in Fantasy Grounds, there are some character issues because Classic and Unity use a different ISO format for text. And then also the extension was not fully optimized for Unity. And when they tried to go in and do that, Unity had changed again. So whoever created that project author extension has to keep chasing down all the changes and the little ifs, ands, and buts that Unity is going through. So I'm pretty sure that author has given up for a while. So on the flip side of that, it has been mentioned, rumors, nothing concrete, that they are working on some sort of tool to help us in the community. And that would be something like the extension that we're mentioning, which is Project Author. But I have no dates. I have no actual confirmation. I don't know when that's going to be, but I'm pretty sure it's in the works. So it is a request from developers. So that's something to look forward to this year, I believe. I don't, maybe next year. I don't know. But it has to be on their priority list. So there might be other things that are like the new line of sight is probably more important to them than the author thing. Hopefully that answers your question. So we're not the official Fantasy Grounds group, but we are in contact with a lot of the developers and the owners of the company, but they normally keep that locked down. So they don't, they won't share the data because it's not complete or it's not compatible with the current version, because they have a higher functioning version that's probably in beta. And once they're happy with the way it worked, then they kick it out to us as an update. I don't get to see those, so I don't know exactly what they're fixing at any given moment or what they're working on. But they do have kind of a roadmap, but it's internal. So I have no idea when and why and how they're going to work on things. Okay, so the other thing is, if you have a story entry, whether it's yours or let's say from Lost Mine. So let's say for some reason I want to borrow the appendix of monsters from Lost Mine of Phandelver. If I pop that up, there is some inline tables. You have different formatting here, which we'll go over soon. And then there's probably some links in here that link to the actual creatures. Or, yeah, here's a link for the monster. Bring that up, it brings up the NPCs. So what I would do is make a copy of this if I wanted to borrow this index. So if I drag this copy that's part of the module into my particular area, you can do it. I can actually drag that over and put it in there. The problem is, though, it's that it's linked to the original module, and all it is a link. At that point, if you load that up and you try to access that particular copy, it's going to tell you to load Lost Mine of Phandelver. And that's not what you want it to be. Independent if you're planning on selling it, but if you're using it for your home use, it's not a problem, especially if you own Lost Mine. But if you're going to build your own content, you need to have a separation, and that would be to first make a copy. So now I have the same entry, but it's a copy, and all I did was drag this pin out and back in to the story entry, and now it has copy after that. Now I'm going to drop down, provided that you've already made the group, and I'm going to add it to my story. So I'm going to drag and drop this story entry to this group. And now the appendix, the copy of the appendix, is part of my module. And if I open this up, if it was previously copyright, which some modules are, I can now unlock it and edit it as I see fit. Also, I'd probably renumber it. So I'm going to make this 00.02.
If I'm not mistaken, is it mostly when you run into copyright problems is usually when it has to do with images?
Usually, but there are some modules, depending on which ones they are and when they were created, that have that issue. So Lost Mine is pretty much unlocked. There's not too many parts of it that's locked, but there are other modules that don't allow you to edit them. You have to make copies of them. So it depends on the content, but you're right. Artwork and tokens and maps and such, those don't let you make copies at all. So you have to load up the module and use it in the session. You can't make a copy and then bring it over to another campaign. Not without buying it from outside and bringing it in yourself. So now I have this story entry here, and I need to add this to the index. So Lady Shel, how would I add this in here now that I've created another chapter and already made this list? So this is something you're going to come across. You're going to want to add a link in between two, and it might cause you grief. So what I do is I'll grab this new link and I will put it at the very end and kind of slightly below the K there. And it should have linked it there, but it didn't. So what I'll have to do now is link this in, and there we go. So that's how you would insert one in the center, and I didn't even put it in the right place still. So I hit Control Z.
Yeah, I've had that happen.
So I hit Control Z to get out of to undo what I did. That's one of the commands. And then I'm going to go in between these two and see if that works. Nope.
It's really fussy with the positioning of stuff. Maybe if you do a Control 1 to turn off the list feature and then insert your thing.
Yeah, that's a way to do it.
Also, my
Okay, here we
squeezing
go.
arm wants to know, would filtering for OGL only help mitigate that?
Filtering for OGL. I'm not sure what he means, but
For the reverse engineer manual, you answered that question, and then my squeezing arm asked, would filtering for OGL only help?
well,
Or maybe they were talking about what you were just showing about searching.
that just depends on what you're loading. So you can't search multiple adventures or modules. You can only search within. And if you're talking about OGL, there's a thing called SRD. And if you load the SRD, then you would unload all this stuff. And at that point, you can get around copyright stuff for the most part. But nonetheless, you still have to make copies of whatever it is that you're working with.
So it's not linked to the other book.
Correct. So you're trying to get away from links directly to a manual or a book and just trying to use the SRD as your basis. And if you copy anything out of the SRD, you only have to mention that in the story credits, and there's some other legal things that you have to add. But yes, the OGL is basically the SRD. And that would be what most people work from. So rather than working from this content here, I wouldn't even have this stuff loaded. I would have just the SRD, and if I was making custom content. But that's kind of getting off the scope of the class or the show. So now this is basically how you would align the story, basically for organizational purposes. So I'm going to open up my blank story entry. And that's no longer blank because I screwed it up. There we go. Okay, so the blank entry, you have some things that you should know to help make things a little quicker. So Fantasy Ground has shortcuts that are unique to different data types, and it has shortcuts unique to the entire interface, which are like core functions. And then you have ones that are unique to specific rule sets. So we're going to just have some generic ones up here. Lady Shel has provided me with a graphic. So if I pull up my notes and I bring this up, there are some formatting shortcut keys that you should know about. And these are from the wiki. I don't know if Lady Shel, if you have where you pulled this from. Probably the Atlassian somewhere.
I forgot where I put it, but I'm glad you saved the graphic there.
So the graphic is here. Control A will select all your text. Control C is a copy command, just like in Windows. And if you're not familiar with these commands, this is a really good thing to learn. Control J is when you select or highlight some text here. So in other words, if you have a bunch of random text that you've taken out of a PDF, I'm going to hit Control A. That's going to select all the text, and then I'm going to click Control J, and it strips out a lot of the formatting. So now it's a cleaned up group of text, and now you just come through here and you will reorganize it the way you want. Because often when you pull from PDFs, they have things that are wonky. They have these things called carriages, which are your returns. And then you have ligatures, which are strange characters that take the place of the letter F or the letter L. And then you also have double spacing. So if you're copying and pasting from a decent PDF, not one that's images, but one that's actually text, you want to run it through a text editor. And one of the tools we recommend is either Sublime, or the one that most people use is Notepad++. Both of those are tools that are for formatting text. You use them outside of Fantasy Grounds to strip out unwanted spaces, unwanted characters, and or strange characters or symbols that people put in. And lots of times people will use symbols like accents or anything like that. Those don't compute in Fantasy Grounds, both Classic and Unity. So you want to avoid using weird characters when possible. And what,
Sometimes they have their titles are used with an image, and
yep,
that kind of messes stuff up too. Or
correct.
they'll do a drop cap for the first letter, and that won't
Yes.
display correctly.
So anything fancy from a PDF more than likely is not going to transfer over. So if they're trying to make their PDF look nice, they're not creating it for VTT. They're creating it for printing on demand or PDF view. That is why you get a lot of garbage from different sources. Is you have stuff that's scanned on the internet that's just images, and it's probably bootlegged. And if you do have a legitimate PDF, occasionally the authors are going to put in some fancy photos and, like she said, like drop caps and colors and all kinds of things. So when you come across that in Fantasy Grounds, you have to work around that. And the best way to do that is to control copy all of the text from the page you're working on within your PDF and paste that into a text editor like Notepad++. So that is a tool to use, and you can change the formatting to ISO. I don't remember the number, but there's an ISO format that Unity uses. And if you have strange characters or foreign characters from other languages, those don't compute. The other thing is spelling. Sometimes spelling breaks things. So if you have somebody who is from the UK that spells armor class as AMOUR instead of MAOR, that will not parse in Fantasy Grounds. So there's a lot of little nuances with text that can break things. But for story entries, for the most part, just try to avoid any fancy capitalizations, or you can use bold, italics, those sort of things. But when you start getting into fancy text, it's not gonna work. Fantasy
Got another
Grounds,
question.
sure.
Okay, my squeezing arm would like to know, do you ever build story entries direct with XML? I said that I don't, but
No,
maybe you do.
part of the reason for that is I don't work with XML. I don't have the training or the patience for it. I would rather do most of it in here. Occasionally, though, if you make a mistake and it takes too much work to come into Fantasy Grounds and fix it, you can go into your own XML that you've exported in the module and crack that open and make changes there, save it, rebundle it, rezip it, remodify it back to a mod file. That might be a situation where I might be tempted to do that. But creating the entire thing in XML is not my ideal way of creating content. So maybe as a hot fix for something that I broke that I don't want to go and redo the whole thing over, I might go into the XML and fix that one little piece. But I think it's a lot easier to make mistakes in an XML environment as opposed to Fantasy Grounds. And that's the only reason I can think of why I wouldn't do it. Is A, I'm not familiar. B, it's easier to screw it up. And C, as far as the GUI interface and how it looks, I like to know what it's going to look like as I'm doing it, not have to save it, zip it, make it a module, then load up Fantasy Grounds, see what it looks like. That, to me, that's a lot of extra work. I want to build it in Fantasy Grounds and keep it in there as much as I can. But I do understand the allure. If you understand Lua and copying and pasting and you're very careful and meticulous, I don't see a problem with it. However, it can cause issues if you don't check everything. So all the little sub menus and stuff, you have to really be careful with that.
And the tags,
And the
opening and
tags.
closing and all that.
Yep. So that's one of the problems that we run across when you're doing formatting. Okay, so there are other commands within different rule sets. I think some of them are universal, some of them aren't. I don't even know if there's a really good documentation on other rule sets, but for 5th edition, there's a ton of templates and different tools and extensions and all kinds of things that will help you with creating your documents. There are some other differences that you can probably notice between a non-core book and a core book. So, like, I believe Call of Cthulhu is not a core type of rule set. However, Pathfinder, D&D, those things are core rules. So it just depends on the type of rule set it is, but they might be a little different as far as how you create content outside of Fantasy Grounds. Now, inside, it should be fairly similar. So that could be another thing that might be an issue. The other thing is the types of formatting for different types of text. So there are 6 commands that you should know. Control 0 is basically turning this text here into normal text, which it is right now. So this text here that I have in this entry 01, this is basically normal text. So I'm going to spend a little time formatting. So this is called story physical attributes. So if I highlight it and I hit Control 0, it's just going to leave it the way it is. If I hit Control 2, it makes it a header. If I hit Control Z, it will undo what I just did. If you hit Control 3, it makes it a story block. I'm going to hit Control Z to get out of that or to undo. If you hit Control 4, you get a, what is that, a indented bullet list. And if you hit, let's see, Control Z again, Control 5, that is a link. It's a blank link at the moment. And then there's Control 6, which is a inline formatted table. So those are your 6 different paragraph types that you can create. And those have some limitations too. For instance, this text bubble will not allow you to have separate, or if I make this a text bubble like here, you cannot have separate paragraphs in this group. You have to make another bubble. And for formatting purposes, you have to hit like Control Tab to create separation or cells within a given inline text table. So those are different ways that that you can format the text. So the chat bubble sends the data to the chat window. So if I click this, it would technically send that over to the group. If I, let's see, if I change this to, if I right click on it, go to the paragraph type, and if I change it to a chat frame, and then you right click on it, and then you'll have a body of text up here where you can also, there's another option where you can assign the speaker or whoever's actually saying the text. Right now, I can't even do anything with it because I have all this funky formatting. So this is a text box. Now that I have regular formatting, now it says formatting and it's just the DM narration. Or I could put, if I go to paragraph types and I click assign speaker, now it's going to show as the DM saying it or an NPC or whatever you want. So, any questions?
I just wanted to add, like back in the tables, when you were talking about tables, you said how to split the tables into different cells. But if you, for example, your header was going to spread across 3 cells, you would do a control plus to add additional cell space to your header. And then on your second line, you would put your one column, and then you do your control tab. That would make your second column. And then control tab would make your third column. And then your top line will be all across, but your bottom, your second line will be split into 3 different sections. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So when
Sean,
go ahead.
also Sean Kennedy had a question.
Sure.
Where would you find all the control commands in one place? I gave a link up here to the wiki, and if you go on that page, it has the image that Laerun showed just a little while ago, which shows the different commands.
Yep. And then the control one should be in there as well. So there's Windows-like commands, and then there's Fantasy Grounds text formatting commands. And in our college, we actually have a PDF that we put out that has a bunch of shortcuts. That's kind of an in-house tool that we use when we do our classes and such. We just took the information off the wiki and made it more convenient, so we're not constantly having to go there to find this stuff. We've also put it in some of our modules. So we have like a DM module that we can load up that has examples of how this stuff looks and how it works. But again, we had to create all that ourselves. So basically, you have your formatting of text, your formatting of the layout and such. Now we're going to touch on another topic, which is kind of unique to. In this case, this is kind of unique to 5th edition. I don't know if the other rule sets offer this or not, but provided you have the correct books loaded, in this case, it's going to pull from templates that come from the Dungeon Master's Guide. But Lady Shel and I researched this before the show, and I knew there was other sources. So we know that Mordenkainen's and Xanathar's also provide more story templates. But for this show, for time-wise, we are only going to show the DM's Guide version. So we have templates here, and these come from the Dungeon Master's Guide. As you can see, I have it filtered to the DMG. But had I had Mordenkainen's and the other Xanathar's loaded, I would have more options. Now you can also create these yourself. They can be simple or very complex depending on how you do it. Now the tables that these draw upon, so all of these are actually just basically this is an artifact template, and it has tables that it calls upon. So there's minor benefits, major benefits, minor detrimental, and major detrimental properties. So when you open up your tables section, you would have to create all these tables first. And we're not covering tables today, but all those tables would be in the player's handbook, or in this case, it's the DM's Guide. So if you wanted to do a random dungeon, you have all these different tables to draw upon. So in that case, we would go to a random dungeon generator or a dungeon adventure framework. So here we have this template, and it calls all these different, there's goals, location, creator, purpose. That's what all these tables are here, is for this to draw upon. So these little square brackets around the text underneath the header is basically telling Fantasy Grounds, I want this table to roll, and this is the name of the table. So what it knows to look in the tables directory, and it will generate based off of all the different table templates that, or the actual tables that you've used. So what this template does is it gives you a way to generate a random whatever you want, really. In this case, it's a story output. So let's say you wanted to create a one-shot. You don't want to go out and buy anything. You already have all the content. So you would build all your tables first. Once the tables were built, you would put them in a group of some sort, of course, while you're building them, and you would name them aptly. Once you've done with all the tables, Then you come to the actual template. You can make a blank template as well. And in the story entry area under template, you can effectively create your own blank template and create your own framework for whatever it is that you're doing. So you don't have to use the one from the Dungeon Master's Guide. However, you can use these as ideas and as ways to understand how they're laid out. So this is just a blank template, and this would be like if you built your own tables, or maybe you borrowed some, who knows. But this would be basically your own template. These templates are already, this one template is already created, and this is the Dungeon Adventure Framework. So if I click generate down here on the bottom, there's a generate button. It basically rolls on all these tables at once, and then it gives you an output that's a story framework. So what it does is it gives you some inspiration on how to set up a one-shot or some kind of adventure. So it lists the party's goal, which is to stop the dungeon's monstrous inhabitants from raiding the surface world. Where's the location? In a desert. The dungeon creator is, there's no creator, it's their natural cavern. So no one built the lair that these creatures live in. The purpose of this lair at one time or another, it was a temple or a shrine at one point, even though it's natural. Dungeon history, the location is cursed by the gods and shunned. The main villain is an aberration bent on corruption or domination. So that kind of ties into the invasion. The villain's scheme is power. They want to conquer a region or incite some sort of rebellion. Their method would be captivity or coercion or some sort of eviction. The villain's weakness is the villain is destroyed if someone speaks its true name. So it's almost like a demon or a devil. If you know its true name, you have control over it. Your adventure allies would be inexperienced adventurers. You may have a respected elder that's giving you the quest or giving you information about, what's going on. Location details, they don't really give you that. You can place this wherever you want as long as it makes sense. You have an adventure introduction that says a mysterious magic item or a cruel villain teleports the characters to the adventure location. So if you think about, what is that? There's a show called, or a movie, and it was, God, I can't think of it. It was turned into a series, Stargate. So when they went through the Stargate, they ended up on this world where they had to deal with, trying to find out how to come back. And then they also dealt with the villain or the problem within the story. So it'd be something kind of like that. The climax is the dungeon begins to collapse while the adventurers face the main villain, who attempt to escape in the chaos. A framing event might be a solar eclipse. So when an eclipse comes out, it triggers some kind of environmental danger, and then it causes an earthquake, and then the temple or the cavern falls in on itself. So you may have a complication, which is a moral quandary. In this case, it's about honor and respect. The plot twist might be the adventurers are racing against other creatures with the same or opposite goal. And then there's a couple side quests. Discover the nature and origin of a strange phenomena in the area, which may or may not be linked to the adventure, and secure the aid of a character or creature in the area. So maybe right before you get to the dungeon, you meet up with a creature that's native to the planet that at first seems hostile, but is actually friendly, like maybe a thri-kreen or a mantis type person. And then that person ends up helping you in the adventure. Maybe they guide you.
What about a sphinx?
Yeah, or a sphinx or whatever you want. So that's just an example of what can be done with templates. Templates can build items. They do all kinds of tertiary functions that you would use to either help inspire something or to create something. So that's a really cool tool that I don't know if it's unique to 5th edition or not, but it is one of those tools that I appreciate about Fantasy Grounds, is that you have that capability. So if you go to the story entry and you click templates, there are the ones that are included in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But like I said, there are more that comes from Xanathars and Mordenkainen's. So if you load up the setting or the books for those, you'll have like twice or 3 times as many here as you do here. So one of them is the artifacts. You have a dungeon framework, event-based framework, a generic framework, magic item backstory. So if you're making an item or you want an item and you need inspiration, you click generate. It tells you who created it. It was a dragon. It was made from scales and talons shed by the dragon. Perhaps it incorporates precious metals and gems for the dragon's hoard. It grows slightly warm when you're within 120 feet of a dragon. What is the detail of its history? Heroic. A great hero once wielded this item. Anyone who's familiar with the item's history expects great deeds from the new owner. So on and so forth. So these story templates are pretty nice. I imagine it's time consuming and tedious to build the tables, but once you have a really good set of tables, you can use it to create these type of random things. I don't know how often you'd use it, but I really think it's a cool feature that Fantasy Grounds has, and it is part of the story entry, which is why we brought that up. So is there anything else, Shel, that we should cover that you think we might have missed? On my notes, it said, the story is the heart of everything. We showed a little bit about formatting and that you can link the story entries together, and you can also link other products or other banners. Like if you had parcels, you can link those in your story entries. And then we had the templates from the DM's guide, and then we discussed a little bit about the copyright and all that kind of stuff, which is a little bit off topic, but it is related.
I can't think of anything else that we haven't already covered. Does anybody have any other questions? If you do, please put them in the chat and we'll get your question answered, hopefully.
Yep. So we got a few minutes. So I just wanted to thank everyone for showing up. If you are a part of the community already and you need these shortcut things, you can ask for them. We have PDFs that have kind of like a listing. And then the other thing is this month coming up in February, tomorrow, we are starting our new rule set a month, which will be AD&D or D&D Classic, and that will cover first and second edition D&D. And we have events, and we have contests, and we have symposiums, and all kinds of cool stuff. As far as this type of teaching goes, normally we don't get too much into module creation, but this is where this would come in. A DM 101 and a 102 is what I'd recommend, mostly 102. The 101 just kind of shows you how this stuff is, how it connects and how to run a pre-made module. The 102 kind of gets more into this type of stuff where you're formatting and creating different assets for a module. It doesn't cover character stuff, which would be like building characters and backgrounds and spells and such, but it does cover this story template type stuff. So and creating all the different stuff listed here on the right, which is all these banners. So tables, quests, NPCs, encounters. And we're going to go down this whole list. So our next thing is going to be quests and potentially something else, because quest items aren't very large, so not much to talk about there. So any questions before we go?
Nope, nothing. Let me paste the link to our, wait a minute.
Thanks, Squeezing Arm, for the super chat.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Very cool.
I just pasted the link to the landing page for our D&D Classics month, which is starting tomorrow in February. And you can look at the different classes that we'll be running. And then we'll also have games. We'll also have combat class, and we'll also have a symposium with the person that converted the D&D Classic rule set to Fantasy Grounds, and that would be Celestian.
And a question came up about the traveler events. Yes, everything that was recorded has to be edited, and we're going to make a special playlist. And I did get a hint from Mad Beard Band that said he might make us a video that will include building content in Traveler. So that'll be cool. I wouldn't count on it, but he said he might build us a video and give it to us so that we can post it in the same playlist. So that's something to look forward to. But we do have the symposiums and some of the other classes done, in the recording. We just have to get them uploaded, and we have to edit them and such. So they're on the way. Give us about a week or so. I know that Rex had told me he was working on them. So yep. And if you guys
We
are,
will we will also be having a recap of Traveler Month. G Rex is going to get that to me, and I'm going to be posting that on the website so you can see, what happened and everything. So, yeah, look for that on our website maybe next week, hopefully next week sometime.
yep. And if you guys are inclined and you're not already a patron, we do have a patron website. It'll be in the description. We also have a donation site, and you're not obligated, of course. And already Squeezing Arms already threw us a couple bucks, which is great. What we do with that is we end up buying our plugins for our website, and we often will buy a rule set or an upgrade for one of our teachers. So it's not just somebody just pocketing the money all the time. It's mainly going towards the community. So all right, thanks Shell for the link. Um, Thanks you, Shelly, for joining me and helping me out. And hopefully, you guys are going to get our next episode, which is in a couple weeks. When is that? February. It's not the.
14?
Yes. So February 14th is Valentine's Day. So
Yeah.
that will be the next time we do this. And we'll be covering basically the banner that deals with story entries. And I would think that, is something that would be related to quests or milestones. And we could talk about how different people prefer to use experience, or they just want to use the story to build their characters up. And I'm pretty sure we had something that might be going with that, because that's not a whole topic in itself. That's like a 10-minute topic potentially. So, all right. So hopefully that's it. And Lady Shell, you want to say our outro?
Um, I don't even know what to say. Thank you for coming, everyone. And if you missed any of the video so far, you can check this out. Since it is a live stream here, it will be available immediately after we hang it up. You can watch it from the beginning if you missed anything before. And thank you for coming. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again.
Happy gaming, everyone.
Bye.